In this video, I'm talking with Adam O'Brien. Adam is a certified EMDR therapist and an approved consultant, and he's also in the process of becoming a psychedelic therapist. He will talk about the integration of EMDR therapy and psychedelic-assisted therapy. So if you're an EMDR therapist, take a look. Adam O'Brien, welcome to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thank you for being here.
And thank you very much for having me. I very much appreciate it.
So, Adam, you're a LMHC, which is licensed mental health counselor. You're a KSAC and PhD candidate in addiction studies. You are a certified EMDR therapist and approved consultant with the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, and you're a faculty member there. You're also certified in brain spotting and consulting training, and you're currently studying at medicinal mindfulness to become a psychedelics therapist. So I already have 3 questions for you. First of all, what is KSAC?
Sure. KSAC is a substance abuse counselor in New York State. It's a credential for us to do treatment for addictions. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And you're also trained in brain spotting, and you're a consultant in training for brain spotting. So it's the same process as EMDR. You become certified, then consultant in training, and then consultant.
Yeah, very similar process. Yep.
And most of what I want to talk to you today is about EMDR and being a psychedelic therapist. So let's start by talking about psychedelic therapy. Where are we with psychedelics and psychotherapy in general?
Well, I think also, I guess to me culturally, it's a good place to start there too, because the conversation has switched, particularly with Michael Pollan's book about psychedelics, as to how can we therapeutically, align with it, and how does it fit in. And the research had a huge pause on it in the 60s, in the late 60s, and then had some gains with MDMA in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's they've, I guess, been strange bedfellows for a while, but it hasn't really hit the mainstream. But I think that it has its roots in psychotherapy from the beginning, when Stanley Groff was doing LSD particular research in psychotherapy in the 50s. They definitely saw the potential. It has a history in self-help, and so people are asking, like, how is this all happening, and how does it work and stuff like that. I think where we are in the field is the research is gaining steam, and has been mostly due, I think, to the funding through MAPS. The multidisciplinary, I forget the A, psychedelic sciences. What's the A?
The organization that promotes safe use of psychedelics and research about psychedelics. And it was founded by Rick Dublin, I think, and a while ago, about 3 decades ago.
Yeah, he was a part of the early 80s in MDMA, and he kind of carried the tradition from Harvard of Ramadas and Timothy Leary. And saw the power and the potential, and created the nonprofit, the MAPS organization, to help fund research and to advocate for overturning, particularly psychedelics, as a Schedule I drug, because it has therapeutic value. Then the research started gaining steam in '95 with Rick Strassman. He performed some studies on DMT and started having a much much more medical understanding of some of these chemicals that are derivative and really derived from nature and organic within our own body. And that has, I think, opened the gate since '95, since the kind of a how to get through the FDA with some of their approvals. And that's why you're seeing a resurgence, which 30 years later they've been working hard, and
Yeah.
The research is starting to demonstrate how this can be a breakthrough therapy. And MAPS particularly got designated breakthrough therapy a couple of years ago with some of the MDMA and PTSD. So to me, the field is at two kind of intersection, or one intersection, but kind of going two ways, but they're parallel, I think, because there's the understanding that I think in the broad sense of addiction, we're starting to move more towards harm reduction and prevention,
Right.
and education, rather than this, drug policy and the war on drugs type of thing, where we're realizing that that's a futile attempt. And so we're looking at psychedelic integration, and it's how do we prepare people, how do we educate them, how do we give them the necessary skills to be able to go into these lands. And we'll talk about where these lands are taking, where they are, what they are.
Yeah.
And then you have post, helping people land and integrate this material. What are they bringing back? Particularly in the pre, you're setting intentions, and you are bringing something to the medicine or to a guide and saying, I want to work on this. How do I gain access to my inner world, or a bigger world that we are biologically connected to? Just through our evolutionary pose in the reptilian brain, mammalian brain, and the neocortex, we're opening up deeper parts of the brain and the body with these medicines. And so it offers for a much, I think, deeper healing. When we actually start talking about like psychedelic sessions, there's going to be a bit of psychedelic integration, and then there's like the psychedelic sessions that offer the opportunity to resolve traumas, and to do deeper type of work. So I see that. I see a parallel happening. There's a lot of crossover. There's pre and post, which is considered psychedelic integration, which is not about doing psychedelic sessions. It's more about like bookending good therapeutic skills. And then you have psychedelic sessions, which timed appropriately in the clinical arc, can do a lot of benefit and resolve traumas, which is where the EMDR community kind of comes in, that they have a strong background in this.
Yeah. So in psychedelic-assisted therapy, we're talking about set and setting. There's a lot of emphasis on set and setting. And in EMDR, we have a lot of emphasis on the preparation phase. So are these parallel?
I absolutely think so. Phase 2 is preparation for going for a deep dive into your past. They've added one more S to the set and setting, which is skill. And that skill are things that we teach in phase 2 already. Those kind of skills, awareness skills, meditation, mindfulness.
Excellent. I love it.
Having a good practice. Right. So really bringing not just the medicine as like the trip, but also, do you have your flight, itinerary? Are you ready to go into these deeper places? And meditations offer, gateways into this. And so, yeah, we're definitely talking about a similar arc here, which I think EMDR, as it's been, presented and framed, is good therapy from beginning to end. Where you preparation, and then you do some of the deeper work, and then you have integration type things on the end.
Yeah.
So the consensus model, where we have stabilization, preparation as the first stage, and then the second stage is memory reconsolidation and trauma resolution, and then the third stage, more maintenance type of things.
Yeah. So let's talk about trauma resolution. How do psychedelics help with we know how EMDR helps with trauma resolution, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how psychedelic assisted therapy helps with trauma resolution.
Sure. The main thing that I see as one of the positives with the use of medicines, really any psychedelic, and even though MDMA is not technically a psychedelic, and ketamine is technically not a psychedelic, these things are still being used. They're more of a dissociative framework,
Right.
because they're lowering some parts of the brain that allow things to come up, or they allow like a pathway for people to get to some of their material.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the client history, you may find that people, like their inner world is like right here all the time,
Right.
and they need to quiet it down. And that's where
Right.
the medicine can actually learn to quiet it down and turn off things, particularly like the default mode network in the brain.
Right.
Um, and so when that happens, people, when some of like the quieting happens, people find that peace and they get to actually listen instead of having constant talk. Or you have some people who are disconnected that really can't reach those deeper levels, that inner world, and some psychedelics will bring it up for them to actually work with.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned the default mode networks that tends to quiet down, and there's actually a fairly recent study about EMDR and the default mode network that I will link below this interview. But I want to share my screen for a minute and show a visual that's from Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. Um, and that's the brain on placebo and the brain, so brain on psilocybin mushroom, and that's a visual representation of the neural networks in the brain, which is this is what we know that is happening in EMDR, right? There's more connections. There's more connections between areas of the brain that usually don't talk with each other, that don't fire at the same time, and we see clearly in the psilocybin mushroom experience that there's a lot more um, interconnections and as a result integration of neural networks. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So I'm wondering how, now that we know that EMDR, you know, triggers all these new connections in the brain, and psychedelic therapy does the same thing. How do we integrate the two?
Well, one is recognizing that we're tapping into the same process,
Mm-hmm.
and the dual attention stimulation that happens with any of the bilateral um, approaches, but dual attention doesn't have to be left, right, left, right, left, right. Um, so we're really talking about the memory reconsolidation or the consolidation process that
Mm-hmm.
is organic to the body. And it has been noted, and people who have been doing EMDR for a while have probably heard a client say that, wow, that was really trippy. Um, we're opening the same biological human kind of healing that is available to all of us, and EMDR presents a framework in which you really can do a solid work with the pre and post type of things. Now, you use the word integration with that slide. Um, when you're under the effect of the drug, it's a short term um, thing. So they're making neural connections and they're opening up pathways.
Mm-hmm.
But you go as soon as the drug leaves you, you kind of go back to that baseline placebo.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what did I take back, and how do I find the words? It's like way too much stuff can come up in a good way that like you're just filtering through things. It's that generalization process that we see in EMDR where like you
Exactly.
start
Yeah.
targeting one single kind of kernel of a core belief, and it starts triggering all these other episodes. This person is just going through their life, generalizing everything, and just being like, if I resolved this thing when I was 5, I just resolved I'm not good enough for the rest of my life.
Right.
And you get to see a similar type of cathartic release at the end of a psychedelic session. And when you do the integration at the end, you are having them find the words to be able to do that. You're really sending people into the right brain, dissociative, which doesn't mean, EMDR is doing dissociation, but like 1 foot here and 1 foot in yesterday.
Right.
There's, what is the grounding dual attention in psychedelics? I think the medicine is the grounding force, while you go into this library stacks of the mind, or let the library stacks kind of come to you and kind of like just be there on the journey. And the benefit of just being able to let go, the ego death, these things are all good skills that people may need to be able to get to doing EMDR, the deeper stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just, some of the groundwork, I think with psychedelics could be good, like phase 2 type things.
Yeah.
In preparation.
So Adam, I know one of your specialties is addiction, and I know you have consultation groups that focus on addiction. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about addiction as dissociation and the whole case conceptualization around that.
Sure. So the model that Dr. Jamie March and I are putting out there, and I'm currently doing my dissertation on it, is the addiction as dissociation model, which highlights the underlying mechanism of dissociation, of addiction as dissociation. And dissociation isn't clearly defined yet, really, in the literature. It has a variety of terms, and so does addiction. The DSM does not, specifically define it. And any organization that typically defines it usually has, it's this multi-layered, multifaceted thing that involves everything. Our kind of take on it is that, because the drug use is actually a trauma to the body that would produce dissociation, you are seeing the after effects of drug use. You are dealing with a dissociative mind, and that's why when you take the drug away from the person kind of comes back to their, to their own level, to whatever degree they can. But the dissociative aspect to it, as it's like gaining understanding with all the research and all of our brain imaging, we're really understanding dissociation. The model that addiction as dissociation presents is that the same mechanisms that are causing dissociation are also causing the addiction, and you can become addicted to dissociative processes. And some of the earlier work really was laid by Vanderkolk, showing that you can become addicted to trauma. And the same neurochemical type of things are happening with the opioid system in the brain, and the androgenous opioid system in the brain, and the cannabinoid system in the brain. So here we are looking at the human body as like the pharmacy, which are all things that people are playing with opiates, cannabinoid, adrenaline, and speed and stuff like that. We have the same pharmacy inside, and people are bonded to the experience. And if we can take the leap of faith that that like a drug use can actually create a traumatic memory or an addiction memory, which is in the research, then you can be targeting positive, or like the first drug experience that people have. Or if people have negative experience, because they were in a dissociative state or an under the influence state, and this kind of goes to the shamanistic traditions, that sometimes you have to be in a dissociated state to be able to get to that material.
Right. Exactly.
Otherwise, you could be doing EMDR all day, and you may not get to the unknowns there.
Right.
and so these offer another vehicle to get there. And I'm also interested in using, EMDR as an integration tool with future templates, as like the post type of integrate psychedelic sessions to really help people who, when you do get that material to come up again, you can utilize it. Where do you feel that in your body, and be able to, access it with EMDR. So I just feel that the case conceptualization that addiction as dissociation model presents is a functional tool to working not just with addiction, but even just drugs,
Yeah.
And the human body, and dissociation and trauma. These things are on the same spectrum, and that's really what my dissertation is showing.
That's very interesting. So I know you're offering a training later in April 21st. You have a training about EMDR and psychedelics. So can you talk a little bit about what will be covered in this training?
Yeah, I'm going to present kind of how how to use the language. If you want to put yourself out there as somebody who is a psychedelic integrationist, kind of lay the foundations, give you access. I mean, it's a 3-hour kind of introductory type of thing. It's actually part of the bigger training that I have on addiction as dissociation with EMDR therapy that I have coming up in October this year.
Mm-hmm.
But just giving you the basic foundations, how to incorporate EMDR into people who are presenting with it, because we see on Facebook all the time, people are asking. I have somebody doing microdosing. I have people utilizing these things. Can I do this with cannabis? And
Right.
The research is showing that these things produce similar reconsolidation effects. So it's going to be good to have a conversation about it. And I think just getting some EMDR therapists on the same page so they can be a part of the conversation is kind of the intention of this.
That's fascinating, Adam. And your training is going to be on April 21st, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. And
1 to 4 Eastern.
Yeah, I'm gonna link below to both that training and EMDR, the dissociation, addiction and dissociation, in October.
Yeah.
Okay, Adam. One more question. How do EMDR therapists get better? So, if for EMDR therapists who just finish their basic EMDR training and they want to get better at what they do, which we all want to do that, how do we get better? What do we need to do?
Sure. For those who are just finishing, unless you were a trauma therapist before, EMDR or any therapy that focuses on trauma doesn't make you a trauma therapist. You also have to explore the dissociative world, and one of the things I wish I had known at that point, at my end of my first completion of my EMDR foundational, would have been to how to work with the dissociative table, and how to work with like the meeting area of dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
It is, to me, foundational. That would be my biggest hook that I could put out there.
Okay. All right, Adam O'Brien, thank you for taking the time and being on the show. And I look forward. I sign up for your training, so I look forward to your training on April 21st. And thanks again.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.